This is Inside Shale, a feature of the West Virginia Oil and Natural Gas Association. We cover the latest news and information from the industry that is shaping West Virginia. Natural gas is reducing emissions, lowering the cost of energy, and creating jobs. And with natural gas, America is on a path toward a better energy future. Think about it. This is Inside Shale Weekly.
And welcome to Inside Shale Weekly. I'm Hoppy Kercheval. America's natural gas boom has been a rare economic bright spot, and even one that the president likes to take credit for. But as the president's term winds down, the administration is waging a war of regulatory attrition to raise drilling costs and reduce its competitive advantage over wind and solar power. The latest effort has come with the EPA's rules, which is an attempt to slash methane. Methane is a byproduct of oil and gas drilling. The industry will be required to cut methane emissions by 40 to 45% over the next decade from 2012 levels. This rule spares existing wells that make and makes no changes there, but for all new or modified wells, they will have to install costly new methane mitigation systems. Now, the environmental side says that methane is a powerful greenhouse gas. It needs to be reduced. But on the industry side, the argument is that methane production, that methane leakage has been reduced dramatically, and that these new regulations amount to an additional burden on this enterprise. Mark Mills is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, CEO of the Digital Power Group, a tech-centric capital advisory group, a faculty fellow at Northwestern's McCormick School of Engineering and Applied Science. He's a contributor to Forbes.com, co-author of The Bottomless Well, The Twilight of Fuel, The Virtue of Waste, and Why We Will Never Run Out of Energy. It was published in 2005. His articles have been published in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times Magazine. He's a frequent guest on CNN, Fox, NBC, PBS, and has appeared on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. And now he's on Inside Shale Weekly. Mark, good morning. How are you? Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. A pleasure to join you.
Thank you very much. So why is this methane rule, these rules, why is this excess, regulatory excess?
Well, it's a really simple way to look at this. First, methane is fundamentally the same as natural gas. It's
right.
not a byproduct, as you know, and I'm sure your listeners know. That's what natural gas is. And so one does get some tiny amount of leakage associated with drilling for gas. The whole point of drilling for gas, as all gas drillers know, is to get gas to sell, not to leak. So the industry is pretty darn good at preventing leakage. and you're right in your lead-up that there's been a radical reduction in leakage, even at the same time, there's been a huge increase in the production of gas. But here's the basic problem. Mm-hmm. If the EPA were to achieve its goal, its stated goal, to reduce emissions further, natural gas is a methane are there's a word in this thing, natural. It's all over the planet. It's emitted from animals in the digestive tract, from termites, and from wetlands. A mere 2% increase in the wetlands of the world would totally wipe out all other reductions from American natural gas fields if EPA had its goal achieved. This is, if you just think about this is just silly. There's no possibility, whatever you think about climate change and methane's contribution to it, there's no possibility, zero, that this kind of rule will have any impact on the world's climate. But it will cost money, and it will cost money for an industry that's been, as you pointed out, a bright spot in the American economy. That just makes it a priori nuts.
Mark, do you believe that the administration and the EPA are imposing these methane rules, and frankly other rules, which we could talk about, but these methane rules because they truly believe that the reduction, that a further ordered reduction of methane will make a difference in the climate, or that it falls in line with a general anti-carbon mentality?
Well, I don't have to believe things. I just have to take on faith what they say, and they say the EPA or its adherents. It's the sycophants in the communities that love what EPA does. They say both things clearly in writing and verbally, that they really do believe that the climate's imperiled, although there's no evidence for the world being imperiled. It doesn't mean humans don't affect things on the planet. The idea that we are facing an apocalypse is not only silly, it's not supported by any facts or any real science. And they do believe that America has to do something. We have to lead. They believe those things. The problem is that if America, quote, leads on reducing the use of hydrocarbons, it will have no impact on the planet because all the growth in energy use is outside of the United States now. Most people know this. And the increase in energy demand from the world's poor the next 20 years, we'll have a growth in the consumption of oil, coal, and gas equal to adding 2 United States worth of demand. This is another way of saying it doesn't matter a whit what we do. The consumption of hydrocarbons is going to go up in the future.
Mark Mills is with us, Senior Fellow at the Manhattan Institute, CEO of the Digital Power Group, a tech-centric capital advisor group, faculty fellow at Northwestern's McCormick School of Engineering and Applied Science. How do you think the industry is going to respond here? Will they push back legally? Will they shrug their shoulders and go, okay, well, we'll figure it out, and it just means cost will go up? What will they do?
Well, I think they'll push back. I think they need to push back. As a mild corrective to your on the introduction of this segment,
okay.
The rules do currently only apply to new wells, but EPA has itself made clear, as has the environmental organizations, that they can't stop there. They're going to have to make it retroactively apply to existing wells to have a kind of impact that they want to have. So this is just the beginning of the old slippery slope down deeper and deeper regulations. This needs to be opposed. I think it will be opposed. There's probably a political compromise in the sense that almost everything that the industry does to improve its efficiency of operations inevitably leads to lower leakage. So there's a trend, as you pointed out, to significant reductions in leakage associated with drilling for gas. That will continue. So if we want to play a political kabuki dance, what we would do is take credit for a normal engineering improvement and let the feds get their feather in the cap for convincing industry to do what it would do anyway. But to accelerate it, to do things that are just impractical or expensive, you have to oppose that. It doesn't make any sense.
And speaking of reduction, the EPA's greenhouse gas inventory, its own inventory, acknowledged this year that methane emissions from natural gas production have fallen 35% since 2007. That's despite a 22% increase in gas production over the same period. So exactly. you see which way the curves are going.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think too, Mark, that this may, and maybe this is too glib, but it could represent on the part of administrators in Washington a not understanding the market and capitalism. And that is, if stuff that is valuable is leaking, you're going to find ways for it not to leak so you can make more money.
Well, exactly right. I mean, that's precisely what's been going on. That's why the leakage rates have gone down. It's normal in any business. But the context here matters. I mean, the quantity of methane, natural gas that's being leaked, is a tiny percentage of natural emissions of this exact same gas from all over the planet in the United States. So what we're doing is regulating this little tiny fraction that we humans have something to do with, while the identical gas is gushing from all over the earth, literally from out of the earth, and from out of animals and insects, and about which we can do nothing. And to pretend that spending money, any kind of intellectual effort on this will have any impact of any kind is just intellectually silly.
But see what, Mark, what happens, though, we talk about this a lot, what happens, though, is that those who support these kind of regulations win the PR war, because it's set up again, the argument is set up is, do you want to save the planet versus whatever else? So it's always about that, and then if you somehow question any rules or regulations, then you're against saving the planet. That's how the paradigm is constantly framed.
No, it is. We have, and the reality is in that PR construct, it's a winner, because you can't have, and it is true, you can't have industry with no regulations. But there's nobody in industry of any kind in America that's proposing to be zero regulations. Everyone proposes the obvious, sensible regulations based on real science and real economics. You have to take into account human lives and economics when you pass a regulation. Regulations can't be independent of that. And the EPA, frankly, juggles the books when it comes to looking at the economic impacts. They really are not truly, let's just put it this way, they're not really sensitive to that.
Right.
It's not their goal.
Right, and they're not doing a legitimate cost-benefit ratio discussion. So hang on a second. I want to talk to you. When we come back with Mark, I want to talk about Shale 2.0 and what that's about. Mark Mills is with us. Mark Mills is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, CEO of the Digital Power Group, a tech-centric capital advisory group. He's also a contributor to Forbes.com and co-author of The Bottomless Well, The Twilight of Fuel, The Virtue of Waste, and Why We Will Never Run Out of Energy. More with Mark on Inside Shale after this.
The country's top mines are using natural gas to cut costs, improve their carbon footprint. As the best and brightest turn to natural gas, we should all think about using more natural gas to meet our power generation demands. According to Penn State, the switch to natural gas was a big step toward cleaner and more sustainable energy sources. This is Inside Shale.
And Mark Mills is with us, Senior Fellow at the Manhattan Institute, CEO of Digital Power Group, a tech-centric capital advisory group. He's a faculty fellow at Northwestern's McCormick School of Engineering and Applied Science, and he is well published on the field of energy, and particularly natural gas. And he was even on Jon Stewart's show. I got to ask you, Mark, before we move on here, you're not saying the stuff that's popular with the left. Did he give you a hard time, or did you win him over?
It's, the funny thing is, of all the shows that I've done, that's the one that, especially when I go to colleges, that I get the most creds for. I worked in the Reagan White House, and that counts for nothing. But
right.
On Jon Stewart's show, he was extraordinarily kind to me. I don't know why. He seemed intrigued by the book I co-authored with my good friend, because at that time, peak oil was the peak theory that we're running out of oil and gas.
Right.
And our book in my thesis for years has been that that's nonsense, and that we were going to see another gusher of production because of technology. No one was saying that in 2005 and 6 when the peak oil theory was rampant, and so he was intrigued by it, and it gave me very very generous, funny segment. It was really quite remarkable. My children were mortified at the prospect he was going to eviscerate me. It's what I, but he was very kind.
Well, you were a soothsayer because, again, that peak energy theory had everybody terrified, and we were beholden to foreign countries for oil, and oil prices were only going to go up, and it was going to become scarce. And now we've gone just as the opposite direction. Now we have a glut, which is driving down prices. What's going on?
This is a very old technology story. The idea that there was a shortage of oil or natural gas, of hydrocarbons in the planet or the United States is just a myopic way of thinking about technology. All of the production of oil and gas forever has been the direct consequence of better and better technology. I mean, if you think about it, the deep oceans where we now drill regularly were inaccessible, and therefore the gas and oil didn't exist. Well, it didn't exist not because they weren't on the planet. They didn't exist for all practical purposes because we didn't know how to build these big offshore platforms and drill through 10,000 feet of water. The same is true of the shale. The actual quantities of oil and gas in the earth are so large that as a practical matter, they're infinite. For all practical purposes, there's no limit. The idea that we're running out of it is silly. And the idea that technology can't advance to access it inexpensively was also inherently silly. That was sort of the essence of the premise. So then what came along, as we all know, is this magic combination of horizontal drilling, hydraulic fracturing, along with, this is critical, information technology. It wasn't just that we knew there was shale there, as that we had better ways to measure, find, image, steer the drills. All that combination is what yielded this fracking boom.
Mm-hmm. Which we're having now, except of course it's tempered a little bit because of the price situation. So on a technology front, and that is sometimes we don't account for because we don't know what the technology is going to be in the future. Except that we're constantly looking for better technology. So the presumption is that we'll get better and better at what we're doing, right?
Well, yeah, exactly right. Although we do know what the technology of the future is going to be, when the future is the near future. This is the key of why we got it right in our book, and why I wrote this paper called Shale 2.0.
Right.
We do know what's going on the leading edge of the technologists in every field. It's not just in the oil and gas field, but it's true in every field. And here's the key to the future of the shale industry. Yes, the prices are low. So what does that mean? When prices are depressed because you essentially you oversupply the market.
Right.
Anytime you oversupply a market, what a shock! Prices go down.
Right.
Producers always want higher prices. That's the nature of any business. But in the end, what you do is you chase efficiencies, and efficiencies come primarily from new technology. What we do know is the shale industry is a very new industry. This whole construct is very new. It's a little over a decade old, which means it has not yet been subjected to the magic of analytics and digital technology. It really hasn't. We've created this tsunami of data, drilling billions of well feet in shale in the United States. We've built an industry around $700 billion of capital investment in equipment, spinning pumps and engines and machines and chemical analysis and water movements. We've got this massive quantity of data that we've accumulated during that boom and done very little with it. Now we're going to start data mining not just as we've done in effect, to be very simplistic, just as Uber sort of unlocks the value of underutilized assets of people and their cars, analytics and the Internet can unlock this value in the data associated with the shale fields and drive efficiencies even further and very quickly, frankly.
That's a great point. Why don't we sell this stuff overseas?
Well, I've been campaigning for the revocation of these. I have to use the word idiotic. I really do. Idiotic laws in the United States that make it illegal for an American business that manufactures something like natural gas, because we're literally manufacturing gas out of rock, or oil, petroleum. Mm-hmm. It's illegal to sell to overseas customers without permission from the government. This is nuts. You don't have to get permission from the government to sell wheat or to sell transistors or to sell anything except weapons to people who are our enemies. Everything else you're allowed to sell to anybody who wants to buy it anywhere in the world, except oil and gas. This is nuts.
Well, this goes back. This is dated to the gas line days.
It's dated to the idea that we were running out of the stuff, that this was so precious and so limited that we couldn't allow businesses in America to sell overseas. Since it's now obvious that that's not the case, it's obvious to everybody that's not the case, Congress should simply novate those laws and make it possible for American producers to sell to anybody they want. That will not hurt Americans. It will help America. It will drive more production, drive more jobs, drive more revenue, drive more tax receipts for states and the federal government. It's a win-win, not just economically for us, but think about the geopolitics. Where the United States converts from being the largest dependent nation on imports for energy to becoming, and we can do this, to becoming the dominant exporter of hydrocarbons to the world. Not Saudi Arabia and not the Middle East, but to have North America in particular. And we can do this with a partnership with Canada and Mexico, which are both huge producing provinces. We could become, in North America, driven by U.S. leadership, the dominant provider of essential fuels to the world. This would turn geopolitics upside down to our economic benefit. I mean, what's not to love about that?
Yeah, Mark's a great point. Mark, just a couple minutes left. Where are we, though, on infrastructure? I mean, oil became a huge deal in this country when we had an infrastructure, when we had gas stations, when we had refineries, plenty of refineries, roads, and everybody had cars, and then all of a sudden, everything was cool. But it strikes me that we're behind the times on infrastructure with natural gas in this country. Is that true or not?
Yeah, we are. We've got to get caught up. We need to build more pipelines. We need to build more LNG export facilities. All that gets impeded by silly regulations that make no sense, that are antiquated and 40-year-old paradigm that we're running out of the stuff. Private sector will make the investments if we allow it and we give some freedom to it, and if we have environmental regulations that are sensible, not restrictive.
But right now we're facing pretty restrictive rules, especially these methane rules. And how much of a headwind are those methane rules to what is naturally occurring in the market?
Well, I think it's not just the methane rules being a headwind. It's a signal to the private sector that there's a lot more like this coming. It'll make you very nervous to spend billions of dollars, and believe me, there's billions that have to be spent, to do it in an environment where you're facing not just a light headwind, which I would put the methane rule in right now, but a sort of a hurricane force of rising headwinds.
West Virginia, we talk a lot about the Clean Power Plan and talk about a headwind. That's a hurricane, as you said, a hurricane or tsunami toward coal, but that's for another day. Mark Mills, Senior Fellow at the Manhattan Institute, CEO of Digital Power Group, a tech-centric capital advisory group, Faculty Fellow at Northwestern's McCormick School of Engineering and Applied Science. Also contributor to Forbes and co-author of The Bottomless Well, The Twilight of Fuel, The Virtue of Waste, and Why We Will Never Run Out of Energy. Also a publisher of a recent paper on Shale 2.0. Mark, it's been a pleasure talking to you. It's been great insight. Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, good comments from Mark Mills. And I tell you, that's very insightful, because we tend to see what's happening in natural gas sometimes in this monolithic way. Okay, we're drilling for natural gas, and the EPA says, okay, you got to reduce methane emissions. Okay, the price is down, so now it's depressed. But this is a gigantic burgeoning industry here, and we're just now sort of scratching the surface of it, just for the last 10 years with hydraulic fracturing that has occurred in the gas fields. And there's just a lot that's going to happen in the future for our energy security and for our overall economy. All right, there's more to come. Stay with us. When we come back, U.S. Senator Shelley Moore Capito, when we continue on Inside Shale Weekly. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Schools in the Marcellus Shale region, such as Westmoreland County Community College, Pennsylvania College of Technology, West Virginia Northern Community College, Eastern Gateway Community College in Ohio, and Broome Community College in New York came together and formed Marcellus Shale Net, a recruitment, training, placement, and retention program for high-priority occupations in the natural gas industry. You're listening to Inside Shale.
Inside Shale continues. We'll be joined shortly by U.S. Senator Shelley Moore Capito, joined now by Corky DeMarco of the West Virginia Oil and Natural Gas Association. Corky, you heard what Mark Mills said, and it's when you listen to his perspective, you get very optimistic because he's saying there's all this gas out there, and meanwhile, technology is improving. And if you can have reasonable regulations, we're going to be fine with this.
Hoppy, he makes all the points that we've been trying to make in the industry for years. Ever since we realized that we could unleash these shales, the future is ours. We need to build the building blocks to make all the things that he suggests come true. Exporting natural gas and oil changes the geopolitical status of the world. If you're in Western Europe, would you rather buy natural gas or oil from the United States, Canada, or would you rather buy it from Vladimir Putin? I mean, these are just simple concepts.
Yeah, well, it gets back to also when you're a net energy importer, you are at the you're at the will and pleasure of who you're importing from, although they want to do business and sell it to you. But when you're an exporter, you form this trading partnership. You have a dominant position. It's good for our economy. It's all plus.
Well, absolutely. I mean, if when we were originally talking about a cracker, the Brazilians told us that the United States would be responsible at some point for providing all the natural resource to Japan and to South Korea, because China and India would take every bit of natural resource that the Middle East would be able to produce. And that was simply just because they were closer to them than they were to the United States. So it just made sense that they became their major trading partner. At the time, Russia had Eastern Europe, and they thought that we would supply Western Europe.
Corky DeMarco is with us, West Virginia Oil and Natural Gas Association. What's happening in this industry now concerning greater distances in lateral drilling? I'm hearing there's a lot more lateral drilling that's going on, or at least you can go farther with the lateral drilling.
Absolutely, Hoppy. When we first started drilling horizontally in this state, it was down in coal bed methane, and it was a few hundred feet, and then we made the pinnate leaf design and those kinds of things. Now we are in the shales. We went out 4, 5, 6 stages originally. Now we're out a couple of miles where it permits us to be out too far when we have the acreage.
So just the technology's improved to the point that you can do that?
Absolutely.
So you can do, and I know then you have to have larger tracts of land where you acquire the rights from the mineral rights holders, but your footprint is smaller, and economically you're not drilling multiple wells. You're drilling one well, but you can go out farther, right? So there are economies in a couple levels there.
Well, you're not only drilling that one well horizontally, you're coming back and drilling multiple wells horizontally, and then those same pads will probably support the deeper wells. So you won't have to build more pads when you drill that same area deeper in the future.
Okay. We're going to talk more on Inside Shale Weekly. Stay with us. We'll return more right after this.
Every day, Americans commute to work, charge their phones, and do a number of things that require reliable energy. But how often do we take a moment to stop and consider where our energy comes from? One source of abundant American energy is natural gas. With natural gas, America is on a path toward a better energy future. This is Inside Shale.
Inside Shale Weekly continues with U.S. Senator Shelley Moore Capito. Senator, good morning. How are you? Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Great to be on. Thank you.
Senator, there's been an allocation that you have obtained of $782,000 for pipeline and crude by rail safety. What will that do?
Well, I think we know that we've had a couple incidences in West Virginia and certainly in the surrounding area where the question of carrying crude on by railways has a safety issue, and so we need to look at. And we've also had a couple incidences where our pipelines have been corrupted. So I think that what this will do will help modernize. It will help our infrastructure improve. And I'm glad. I think it's a healthy amount of money, and so I'm glad that it will be used for that purpose.
Senator, we talk a lot on this program about the new methane regulations. We just talked about it on the last half hour as proposed by the EPA, and these are major reductions imposed by the EPA on methane emissions, leakage emissions, even though methane leakage has been going down significantly. Even with the shale boom. And you, among others, believe these regulations are unnecessary, and you've proposed legislation to try to hold the EPA accountable. Will your ARENA bill potentially impact these regulations, or is that going to be different?
Probably on the methane regulations, the ARENA bill does not. It deals specifically with the Clean Power Plan, which, of course, is the carbon rules. But on the methane issue, I mean, you have to look at this. You have to look at the number of wells and the number of exploration that's been occurring, and yet emissions are falling. So we're doing it better. We're doing it more efficiently. We're doing it more environmentally correct. And so why impose a standard on an industry that is already working to achieve that goal without this onerous regulatory regime that the EPA just keeps doubling down on every time you look around? It's something new. It's the waters of the USA. It's methane. It's ozone. It's carbon. And I think what we found certainly in this decade that we're decreasing our emissions in all aspects. Can we do better? Absolutely, but there's a cost to everything, and these regulations have enormous costs.
But as you point out, the curve has been bending downward on methane emissions pretty significantly. So it's already being done.
It's already being done, and it's being done, I think, without the heavy hand of the fining and enforcement and regulatory burden. Because with these new regulations becomes a burden in terms of hiring staff and displacing other kinds of employees, because you have to devote so much of your time and energy and money to whether you're complying or not. And we are complying. We are beginning to, our ozone levels too we are complying with what the new regulations are called for. But there's a lot of the countries that can't even comply with the last regulation, and now they're putting one on that's even stiffer.
Senator Shelley Moore Capito is with us on those methane regulations, and we know that there's a judicial pushback on that. There's a legal pushback on that. Is there a legislative pushback on that in Washington?
I think there will be. What you're going to see here between now and the end of December is the Congressional Review Act, which will help us, is a tool that Congress can use that can overturn actions by the EPA. It's just for a year, but I think we're going to certainly, with the Clean Power Plan, and I'm going to be leading this effort, we're going to try to overturn this rule this fall. And the good news about it from folks who would be supporters of that, and I think there's many in West Virginia, is that it's only a 51 vote margin. It cannot be filibustered. So we're going to move forward on that and see if that's the good way to attack at this moment. We could probably do that with methane as well.
Senator, I talk about this a lot in West Virginia, as you know, and I talk about the carbon rules, talk about the methane rules, particularly about the carbon rules. And I'm probably talking in an echo chamber a little bit. Certainly there are those in West Virginia who support the rules, who are deeply on the environmental side, but I think for the most part you have people who are concerned about jobs and the economy and see this as an overreach by the EPA. But still, as I say, I kind of talk in an echo chamber. In Washington, D.C., is there a prevailing attitude? Do your fellow senators and people you still know from the House, do they look at the EPA and go, man, this thing is getting onerous, or are they on the side of the EPA? What are you hearing just at the water cooler?
Well, you know what? It does end up to be a partisan battle with few exceptions. On my committee, the Environment and Public Works Committee, which is the major committee that deals with EPA, you have Senators Markey from Massachusetts, Whitehouse from Rhode Island, that are very, very steeped in any kind of environmental regulation that you just can't get enough, in their opinion. And we never get to the topic of if we squeeze down so hard on coal, which we've done, if we squeeze down equally as hard on natural gas, which we're getting ready to do, we also don't like nuclear, where are we going to power this country? How is that going to occur? Well, you know what? We never have that conversation because, they're answering to an environmental lobby, I guess, that is important to them and really is very appropriate in their states. But then there's the rest of us that have huge energy industries. We're very reliant on fossil fuels. We're working hard to innovate to make sure that we have the next generations. But it really kind of falls down to who's least affected, who and who's most affected, and it seems to really be the heartland states that are most affected.
I was going to say, are there? And I understand the northeastern blue state opposition, but aren't there folks from, I don't know, Kansas or Colorado or Nebraska or a lot of places, or even with the Clean Water, with the Stream Act that are in Wisconsin or Missouri who are concerned about?
Yes. Now, take Missouri, for instance. That's a state where they're deeply concerned because their power generation is in the 80% by coal. They don't mine coal, but they do power generate a lot from coal. I'll give you an example of how kind of strange the rules are. In Wyoming, they have a wind generation facility that they sell. That power then goes to California for renewable. California gets the renewable credit. Wyoming gets no credit. So, it just, in a lot of ways, it doesn't make any sense. And, we're all for renewables, but we all know that they are ephemeral. They only happen when the wind's blowing and the sun's shining. And so, there needs to be innovation there. There's no ability to store that energy. And I'm sure there will be innovation there, but we just have to make common sense out of it.
Right. Senator Shelley Moore Capito, thanks for coming on Inside Shale Weekly. We appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. We'll take a break and be back, rejoined by Corky DeMarco of the West Virginia Oil and Natural Gas Association right after this.
Did you know that since 2001, MIT has run more than 75% of its operations with a natural gas cogeneration plant, producing both heat and power in the same process? As a result of this technology, MIT reports that their plant will reduce emissions by 45% when compared to their older technology. This is Inside Shale.
Show continues with Corky DeMarco of West Virginia Oil and Natural Gas Association. Corky, a couple days ago, Ohio Governor John Kasich announced a new development in the planned cracker plant for Eastern Ohio. What was it? What's going on there?
Well, Hoppy, Governor Kasich announced that PTT Global Chemical would be spending up about $100 million in designing the plant that's proposed for Belmont County. Mm-hmm. This is just another one of the steps that these various companies go through. Unfortunately, I think the Brazilian deal may be so far out now because of the corruption cases and those kinds of things in South America that this may be our first cracker that gets built. Unfortunately, with the Odebrecht problems, they had a cracker they just built in Mexico, so they could have transferred this engineering technology that they brought up there easily to the United States in the Appalachian Basin and foregone a lot of the cost of developing the plant.
The Odebrecht situation is Odebrecht. There's a huge company in Brazil, and they were tied into their national energy production there, and some of the top officials are caught up in a corruption scandal there in Brazil. In fact, the top guy has been questioned in connection with it. So when is there going to when's somebody going to build a plant? I mean, we've been hearing about a cracker plant for years, and when's somebody going to build one, and why aren't they building it now? Because and correct me if I'm wrong, because if prices are low, why wouldn't you lock in prices now? Because that's the feedstock for what you're going to produce.
Prices are low, but the other thing to that is prices aren't going to come up that fast, and if they would announce a year from now, they could lock in a supply for an extended period of time simply because we're going to hedge a bunch of gas prices just to get it into the marketplace. I think my personal feeling is that there's so many people kicking the tires. There's a lot of people who know what we have here now. They've been here, they've looked, they've seen, they know what the Appalachian Basin's potential is. And I think once the first real cracker gets underway, so to speak, somebody's turning dirt, somebody's putting steel in the ground, whatever, I think that's going to start to make people decide, well, you know what, we better pull the trigger because we've looked, and now other people are looking, and the first one there gets maybe the biggest chunk, and then no one wants to be shut out. So those 4 or 5 or 6 crackers that we can support here, they'll start to come in once somebody is actually putting steel in the ground.
Meanwhile, in just about a minute left with Corky DeMarco, the West Virginia Oil and Natural Gas Association, what's the latest on price, short-term and long-term? What are the latest projections?
Well, Hoppy, we thought we'd get a little rebound in the fall. We're now, some of the analysts that I've been reading suggest it may be 2017. We've got a lot of rigs down compared to what was working a year or two ago. But we're also hearing that we're going to have a very cold and very snowy East Coast winter. So that may help.
You and the cold guys, you're the only ones rooting for a cold, snowy, and the ski people, you're the only ones rooting for a cold, snowy winter.
Well, you got to take what you can get.
Exactly. Corky DeMarco, West Virginia Oil and Natural Gas Association. Thank you, Corky. Also, thanks to U.S. Senator Shelley Moore Capito for coming on the program today. And also, Mark Mills, Senior Fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Thank you for coming on the program today. This has been West Virginia Inside Shale, a presentation of the West Virginia Oil and Natural Gas Association, and a paid presentation of the West Virginia Radio Corporation.